On August 5th, 2016, the Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife shot and killed 2 female wolves from a helicopter because the rancher said that they were preying on the cattle that he had released, unsupervised by human presence, into the Colville National Forest. On August 23rd, Wolfhaven International, the Humane Society of the United States, Defenders of Wildlife, and Conservation Northwest released a joint statement after being party to an agreement to exterminate the entire Profanity Peak wolf pack through their roles as members of Washington's Wolf Advisory Group, which is also known as the WAG. In their statement, they said, "The authorized removal of wolves in the Profanity Peak wolf pack in northeast Washington is deeply regrettable." Regrettable? No, it was preventable. This was nothing short of caving into the demands of an irresponsible rancher who released hundreds of cows and calves into a rugged mountain wilderness in an area known to be the core territory of the Profanity Peak wolf pack. These wolves were set up to prey upon the invading cattle, which triggered the protocols that were created by the Wolf Advisory Group, which inevitably led to their executions.
When to kill a wolf pack took a year's worth of negotiations among a variety of stakeholders. The Profanity Peak pack qualified for removal after a dozen attacks on cattle.
Being shot at from the air after an aerial chase.
These protesters say it's a bad policy and the state caved to ranching politics. They want a new rule.
I don't think the American public really realizes that in the American West, that livestock can be in forests like this, open range, and they get priority over native species. In Washington state, in this case, you have over 1 million head of cattle and approximately now 90, maybe less wolves in this state. And they're wiping out an entire wolf pack because they basically brought these cattle in, dumped them in the core of the wolf territory, displaced the native species that those wolves normally hunt, deer and elk, move out when you bring in hundreds of head of cattle.
When the cattle are on here, they socially displace elk and deer and so forth. The elk, for example, don't want to graze in the same pastures, same landscape as the cattle, and therefore they move out. That means that the wolves or any other predators have their food moving away from them. They have to search farther. They sometimes, in searching further, are much more likely to cross a road where they might get shot or hit by a car. They have to spend more energy to try to get energy back. So livestock production has a very negative effect on the overall carrying capacity of the landscape for predators like wolves and cougar and bears.
Another additional protocol would be to move salt blocks away from the wolf den or a rendezvous site, which it turned out is where the cows went. They went right to the rendezvous site, and the rendezvous site is where the wolves socialize. Once the pups are out of the den, which they are in late June, early July, the rendezvous point is the main social gathering place. And that's where the cows went, because there was salt in the area.
It is important for the public to understand, and leaders, politicians, the brutal nature of what's actually happening. Because the Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife is not going to be showing you pictures of their aerial gunning operations or the wolves themselves. They want to keep this secret. They don't want people to basically be able to say, wow, those are the actual animals that are being killed. Those are the actual pups that are being killed. And it's an outrage.
Wolves are social hunters. They depend on each other for their success. And they're not just cogs in a wheel that can be removed. They all have their role to play in the pack. They all contribute to the pack's overall success. When we shoot them indiscriminately, like with hunting seasons, or trap them, or do anything that disrupts that social network, we make them less successful as a pack. And as a result, they're more likely then to go after the easiest thing that they can capture, which is usually livestock in the western United States. So we're setting those animals up for failure by that. In fact, we have a feedback mechanism that is really pernicious. What we do is we go out and we take out a wolf or two in a pack, and then they're more likely to kill livestock. So then we say, well, now we have to eliminate the whole rest of the pack, and then we open up a territory. If it's good habitat, it's going to be filled by a new set of wolves. The new set of wolves are not as familiar with the territory, so they're more likely to take livestock, and so we have this endless chain of, quote, management that's totally unnecessary and largely caused by our own behavior. And if we were to consider the social ecology of wolves, we'd realize that we don't need to control them, and that they're self-regulating themselves, and there's no need for the management except in very unusual circumstances.
In a pen on the Diamond M Ranch, Len McIrvin looks over two injured calves.
It had an area as big as a soccer ball taken out of it at one time, and now it's starting to fill in.
Attacked by wolves, one may live, the other probably won't be so lucky.
This is a cattle killing pack of wolves, and total elimination is the only answer.
Let's talk a little bit about federal grazing leases. Okay, what do I mean by that? Well, this is a national forest. A rancher gets the privilege, pays for the privilege of using these national forest lands to put cows and calves out on in the spring, in June usually, late May, June, for 4 months. They graze out here for $1.69 per month per cow and calf. Just survive out there, keep that calf alive so we can sell it in the fall, and then it goes to feedlot. That's what the federal grazing program is all about. It's about a cow-calf operation while the farmer, the rancher, produces alfalfa on their private property.
In this situation with the Profanity Peak Pack, the rancher, who again is the same rancher that was responsible for the elimination of a pack in 2012 called the Wedge Pack, very similar circumstances. And as then as now, did close to nothing to prevent his cattle from being predated on by wolves. When you look around this country, remember this is public lands, national forest land, you have to come to the conclusion that there are some places that are absolutely ridiculous and inappropriate for livestock. You'd have to have 1,000 range riders out on lands like this to keep track of cattle. When they bring cattle in and dump them off the trucks, they disperse in every direction.
In this case, the cows went out and they dispersed out into the forest. They didn't stay together, they just dispersed all over the place. And the range rider rides around to basically scare the wolves off because the wolves fear human presence.
Suppressed research and video footage from one of the nation's leading predator ecologists from Washington State University showed the cows invading the wolves' core territory. It was also discovered that salt blocks had been placed within 200 yards of the actual wolf den. A situation like this, the native species, the deer and elk that the wolves would normally be living off of and preying on, many of them are dispersed by the hundreds of cows that were dropped off into this area, making it that much harder for the wolves to survive. The Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife also ignored the research coming out of Washington State University's Carnivore Research Lab. Essentially, it was politically expedient for them to ignore it because of the pushback they were getting from conservative representatives in the state. Really, again, this is a perfect storm where the research basically demonstrated under the circumstances, the Profundity Peak Pack, predation on cattle was inevitable.
But ranchers aren't the only ones who support the state's decision to kill the pack. Groups like Conservation Northwest believe wolf recovery depends on balancing public interests.
Is that really the wolf population that we want to repopulate the state?
Not surprisingly, the Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife came out and was publicly saying, are these the types of wolves we want in Washington? All along knowing that there was more to this story than they were letting on to with the media.
This is highly controversial because they're still considered endangered, and it's already drawing strong criticism from people like State Senator Kevin Ranker. This morning, a Democrat who served as chair of the Natural Resources Committee, he's upset because he says the director of the Department of Fish and Wildlife told him they would only kill half the pack to see if it would stop the cow deaths.
It's extreme. It is extreme. Let's be clear. I was told, as was the public, that removal of half the pack would make a difference. And now we're being told they're just going to go ahead and remove the entire pack, and they haven't implemented their first plan.
The idea that you have environmental organizations basically putting out what I believe to be propaganda, that you can have these animals on open range like this, and everything will be fine as long as you have a few handsome cowboys on horseback. You know, this romantic cowboy notion, without looking at the topography, looking at should the American taxpayer be subsidizing this industry, this private industry who has this remarkable history of externalizing the cost of doing business. I'm specifically speaking to public lands ranchers that I have found most often these are individuals that have their hands out for what's essentially welfare to be subsidized. It is my opinion, if you're going to have livestock, which I absolutely think should not happen on open range and public lands like this, if you suffer losses, that is part of doing business. You absorb that.
I am a member of the Washington Wolf Advisory Group. I do believe in collaboration and working with people. However, my opinion, my personal opinion about the process is that it's very much about social acceptance, and social acceptance, which is a key part of the framework of the Wolf Advisory Group, is social acceptance for killing wolves.
What I see is this hatred of wolves as being almost like a form of racism, and that we should never be accepting of that. It's an irrational fear, it's an irrational hatred. Again, social acceptance.
It's very difficult for me to accept that you create a social acceptable model for an endangered species to be killed because of cattle out on public lands. That, to me, seems crazy. So it makes it hard. I honor the Wolf Advisory Group. I think the Department of Fish and Wildlife is doing the best they can with a difficult situation. But I expect to have a minority opinion as long as they allow me to serve as a member of the WAG. Because I'm on the side of predators, And as much as I appreciate the agriculture industry, I think there's a place where you just have to say no. You just have to say that enough's enough. You know, these animals should be entitled to live in the wilderness.
Aerial gunning in this situation of the Profanity Peak wolf pack, or the wolf family, is a brutal thing. They bring in helicopters, and they basically they find the wolves, because in many of these packs you'll have 1 or 2 animals wearing radio telemetry collars, GPS collars, and then they'll pursue them with the helicopters. Oftentimes in situations that we're seeing around us, there's tall timber, they're only seeing flashes of the animal, and so they'll shoot at them over and over and over. This is with shotgun, with shooting pellets. And oftentimes it's not a clean kill. It's hardly ever a clean kill. They'll gut shoot them, not intentionally. I mean, they're trying to kill them, but it'll take 2, 3, 4, sometimes more shots to actually kill an animal. Sometimes they don't actually kill an animal. They'll wound an animal and it will drag itself off and die. I think it's important to remember we're in a fight to save the planet. Worldwide, predators, especially the large predators, are disappearing at an astonishing rate. And what's been incredibly depressing to me is to see that many of the organizations that profess to be conservation and environmental animal welfare organizations have sold out. It's all about making it look like you're making progress when in reality you aren't. And in the situation of the gray wolf in northern Rockies, Washington, Oregon, did we bring them back to kill them all over again? That's certainly what's happening in Montana and Idaho. It's a full-fledged slaughter. We're trapping, ensnaring, and aerial gunning and shooting wolves all over again. Thousands of them. When the science says predator populations are self-regulating for a myriad of evolutionary reasons. I'm sickened by what the environmental conservation community has become in this country. It's not the movement that I got started in the 70s. It's lost a lot of its soul. It's become corporatized, and it's become all about the bottom line.
I think that the current state of affairs of wildlife management in America is in disrepair. And I think it's because people have radically different values on how they view wildlife and how they refer to wildlife and our interactions with other animals. And I think we need to really begin to evolve rapidly. I mean, today, if you will, into more peaceful coexistence and a situation where we don't trump other animals' interests in the, sort of in the name of humans, if you will.
This case here with the killing, the slaughter of the Profanity Peak pack is an incredible example of everything that's wrong and everything that has gone wrong in the process of letting wolves coexist here. It's a case study of basically everything going wrong. It's important that average citizens, again, politicians, people become vocal now. Every individual has power. through writing a letter to the editor, through writing the governor of whatever state they're in, their legislators, their congressmen. It's either now or never, because we're at a real tipping point. The exploiters, the people that take advantage of our public lands, they're not holding back. They're more vocal than they've ever been. The siege of the Malheur National Wildlife Refuge, the Bundy fiasco in Nevada. They're just as vocal. You know, at the very least, you have to respect these people for saying what's on their mind, not trying to disguise it and dress it up as something else, which is what the environmental conservation community has done here. They've gotten in bed with cowboys and with the agencies, and they want to get along with everybody. And unfortunately, if you want to bring about change, we can't get along with everybody. You have to be outspoken, you have to be strong, and in situations like the destruction of this pack, you have to take a stand and show what side of the fence you're on.